How's that?
Good. So here I am on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer. We have a writer here today. Brian Coleman has written for the Herald and other major publications over the years, and he is a PR man. I just get this going here. Sorry. And he's a PR man. And so, Brian, I was going to. You have written a new book, Buy Me Boston, Local Ads and Flyers. And this deals with a lot of flyers and posters that you curated, you archive them in this great book. I was going to ask you, how did you, you said you went around to notable Boston archivists. So tell me about that process.
Yeah, I guess that's the interesting thing about this book is I actually didn't write it. It's funny because there's very little writing in it. I did the intro and the captions maybe, but in the past I've written 550-page books, which are very text-heavy. So in a way, this was a little bit of a new thing for me to do a picture book, basically. I basically call it like a fanzine gone awry.
Okay.
Exploded fanzine, off the rails. So basically, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, I've had access to some really amazing people and people who have really amazing archives. And those are basically not, for the most part, non-academic archives. So they're either personal or they've, when I had access to them, they weren't at universities yet. So Bourne was the longtime arts writer for the Bay State Banner for decades and decades, going back to like the late 60s. She was in the process of donating her archive to Emerson. And so I helped. I
noticed that you've got a lot of your stuff from Emerson. They have an extensive archive.
They do. Well, they have Kay's Bourne stuff, and it's there. They haven't done much with it yet, and I really hope that they will. And I would certainly encourage people to call them up and tell them that they want to see it, so that they will start making more and more of that available. But it is, when I had access to it, it was actually still with Kay Bourne. I was actually helping her organize it in a small part before, as she was giving it to Emerson. So I was part of that process. And it's just an incredible archive from chiefly from Boston's African American arts community, so artists, painters, musicians, all kinds. The scope of that archive is absolutely incredible. So I definitely hope people. It's in the Iwasaki Library at Emerson, and you can find that online. And so I definitely hope that people will kind of want to check more into that. The other big. Even bigger, gargantuan, insane archive is David Bieber, who has just been a collector and kind of a private archivist for many, many years. He worked at WBUR way back when it was still kind of a freewheeling, freeform, almost WBCN type of station in the early 70s. He went on to work at WBCN for many years as the promo person there, eventually at the Phoenix, WFNX, and now his archive is becoming, it's not available to the public. You can't walk in there, but I am friends with him and I got to know him, and so he's very generous, and he has been collecting this amazing, so it's magazines, newspapers, movie posters, photographs, press kits, old radios, stereo. It's staggering the amount of stuff that's there. It's in Norwood, Mass.
You've got to be a real holy fool to do that, don't you think?
I would say more of a saint, but yeah. So if holy fool means saint, because a lot of that stuff, the thing about David's archive that's especially incredible and unique is that a lot of academic archives specialize in, say, they're very narrow. So it would be just this author or this musician's papers, or their recording tapes or their notebooks or something. David's is kind of across the board. So over here you can have a copy of the Avatar newspaper, which is this incredible counterculture arts magazine newspaper from the late 60s. And then over here you would have some kind of a weird, like a Mickey Mouse telephone from the, like everything. And it's still becoming organized. So some of there's a method to the madness there, but you couldn't just walk in and say, okay, here's where the newspapers are and here's where everything is, and know exactly where you need to go. So
Have you ever thought of digitize? I mean, I know I put a lot of my stuff on the Internet Archive. Are you familiar with that? And
I am.
Yeah. You ever think of like putting your images on
my images, like from the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an Instagram page, so I do it that way. I don't put it like on an actual website.
Oh, okay.
Because to be honest, it's not my stuff. I'm
right.
With all of this, and I said on the cover of the book that I'm the curator, because I'm not. The one thing I never want to do and never tried to do and make a point of not ever saying is that I'm an expert on any of this stuff. I'm kind of the ringleader in a way and the curator, and I bring it together. But if it wasn't for these experts that have loaned me all this incredible stuff, I wouldn't be able to do it, because I don't have the stuff myself, even though I have my own collection of magazines and vinyl and newspapers and things like that, but nowhere near. But also with Bourne and with David Bieber and other people like Wayne Valdez, who've been we're all kind of local private collectors and people who've been in different scenes around town. They're the experts, certainly more than I am, and they kind of guide me. So that it's almost a guided tour, and then I say, okay, let me grab this and I'll highlight this. So the thing about the book that I am proud of, that I tried to accomplish when I started out with it, was that it's not one thing. It's not just music. It's not just highbrow. There's music in there. There's some highbrow things.
But I mean, I think the scholars would actually be interested in this. I mean, all this, ephemeral stuff.
I mean, I think so, because I think when you look at it as a whole, when you take everything, because the one thing I did, it's actually presented stream of consciousness. It's not chronological. It's not by all the movie ads are here and here's all the restaurant ads. And I did that on purpose. So that's the way you would have kind of experienced it, say, if you walked into David Bieber's archive. You wouldn't say, oh, I'm going over here to 1973 and I'll just be here for an hour. That's not the way it works usually with, honestly, the way I even deal with, if I go into a library, for instance, like back when I was in college, I used to do all the time, I would have an hour to kill and I would just meander and I'd look at something for 5 minutes and move on and look at something else, and there was no kind of rhyme or reason to it. You kind of just have this kind of flow to the way you're looking at it. So, but I did do an index, so there is an index in the back, and so if you say, oh, I wonder if the Western Front's in there, or is whatever, the Middle East, or what about Marshalls? Is there a Marshalls ad? Yes, there is a Marshalls ad. So, so that when you say scholars might find it interesting, I certainly did that because I hope that there would be a reference. I mean, one of the things it's useful for, I think, and you could probably do this kind of a search online if you wanted, but if you wanted to know where the club was, which eventually became Night Stage in Central Square, long gone. The building doesn't actually even exist anymore. It's been knocked down. But you could say, where was that? What was the address? Like, oh, go right to the ad, because the one thing in the ad is always going to list the address. So you could say, oh, that was at whatever it was, 8-something Main Street, in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I was going to, talk about a few of the places that, because like I say, I've been up here since '73 when I was at BU to go to college, and so some of these places were.
Yeah, I'd love to know what drew.
Yeah, well. But by the way, did you know of the website Dirty Old Boston?
I do.
That's a fine website.
It's an amazing website. I love Jim and that whole crew is great.
So the Austin Wells Theater,
yep.
I remember that very well. It was, give me your I mean, I remember seeing all kinds of arts films and things like that. It was posters all over. What were your memories?
I never went to the Orson Welles Theater.
Okay.
I believe that the Orson Welles Theater, I think it was maybe 87. My history in town is two phases. I grew up in Acton.
Okay.
I went to elementary school in Acton, so out in the suburbs, but we would come in, I would go to Red Sox games, and we'd go to the North End and things like that. But I was young. I wasn't old enough to go to the clubs. Or anything like that. I was 7, 8, 9 years old. Then I got back to town in 88 to go to Boston College, and I've been here ever since. So those are the two phases. So some of that's the other reason why I'm not an expert, because, so for instance, if someone said, tell me about what the Rat was like in '77, I could not tell them. I could say, oh, well, here are some of the bands that played, but I'd rather...
I remember the Rathskeller very well in '73 because I was a freshman at BU.
Okay, yeah.
I went in there and I had long hair, if you could believe that, and all that, and a guy says to me, I want to do something to me sexually, and I said, well, you're not my type, and I remember he threw a pitcher of beer at me, and I left shortly after. But it was a wild place, wasn't it?
Yes. Well,
you must have been there. You know?
I did. I went to the Rat in the latter years. When it was still a great place to go, and it was. The thing was, I went to high school in New Jersey, and I used to go into New York City to shows all the time in the mid '80s. To punk shows. There was a club called CBGB, I'm sure you've heard of. Yeah. The Rat was kind of Boston's version of CBGB. So, and very similarly in that at first it wasn't like, okay, we're a punk club. The punk came from the bands that started playing, and some of those bands, both at CBGB's and at the Rat, started to say, I don't really like this stuff I'm hearing on the radio, and I don't want to do covers, so maybe I'll start playing some original stuff, and I don't know how to play, so it's going to sound a little ragged, but who cares, let's just do it, and all of a sudden they learned how to play their instruments, and the people liked that it was raw and honest and blah, blah, blah. So that's the kind of the beauty of it, is you can see, looking at ads for even the Rat over the years. I think I have the opening night of the Rathskeller in there when it was kind of renamed and relaunched in '74, which is right after you're talking about. And back then it was kind of bluegrass bands and probably a lot of cover groups. Starting in like '75, '76 is when you started to get groups like the Real Kids, Willie Loco Alexander, and some of the groups that would become the proto-punk bands in town, DMZ, etc. So anyways, you tell me, what are your memories of the Orson Welles? Like, do you remember seeing certain...
I remember seeing films. I remember, if you ask me what film, I saw The Third Man by Orson Welles and things like that. It was just a great experience. I was going to ask you also, the channel, it's no longer here, right?
The channel is gone.
Long gone.
Yeah.
I never went there. I think I maybe went there once, but tell me the history of that place. I mean, in a brief history, you only have a bit of time. The
channel, I believe, first started doing shows. It was, what was it called in the '70s? I don't remember, but it started as a rock club in 1980, I believe. It was a really insane place because it was out on the water in Fort Point Channel, and at that time, that was no man's land. Like, as people who come to Boston now...
Hard to believe, right?
Well, like the new South Boston waterfront was just basically tundra. It was kind of where certain nefarious characters would probably
a body or something like that.
Beat up or bury bodies.
Fishes, right?
It was interestingly, one of the ads in there that I was very adamant about putting in was the No Name, because I've been going to the No Name since I was 7 years old, 8 years old, and
it's still in operation.
It is, and God bless it. But I remember driving out from getting off 93 and just looking out, like almost like there'd be tumbleweeds kind of going across, because and now you look and there's 30
there's a lot of artists there also.
Exactly, because that's what happened. So the channel was basically just a warehouse. It was a box, and it was kind of no man's land, so you could kind of do what you wanted. You could probably be as loud as you wanted. You could probably It was it was probably looser than your typical club that might be in Kenmore Square, where you had Neighbors or Central Square or Harvard Square, something like that. But they booked whatever people would go to see, you know. So, and it was a big room. It was probably, I don't know, 1,500 capacity. So it was bigger than the Paradise, for example. Probably not as much as like the Orpheum. So these mid-level bands like whatever, Bow Wow Wow, or you know, some of the bands that were big at the time would come through there. They would have a lot of hardcore punk shows there, but they would have world music. You know, King Sunny Ade would probably play, or they'd have reggae shows. I mean, I saw Slayer there, this crazy death metal band. So the channel was fun. You know, it was definitely wide open, and I think actually there's a book in process about the channel going on
Yeah,
right
I think
now.
so, yeah. You know, I remember when I was, you know, right before college and I visited Boston, I went to Paul's Mall
Sure.
and saw Pharoah Sanders and
Wow.
Esther Phillips, and it was a great little, one right next to the other was Paul Mall.
Jazz Workshop
The
in
Jazz
Paul's Mall.
Workshop, yeah.
Yep.
That was quite a place for...
That was Fred Taylor's joint, and you know, it's the number of artists who play. Actually, literally just earlier today, I was doing a little bit of digging. There's a great new compilation out about Boston reggae from like the late 70s to the late 80s, and they talk about the scene. The Orson Welles figures in because The Harder They Come, which was a Jimmy Cliff movie,
Yeah, that was a great movie. Yeah.
was huge. Like, went on for years and years, long after its initial release. It had
Sort of
this
like
cult.
a Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Exactly, and it had this cult following that was almost unrivaled anywhere else in the country, where they would play it as a midnight movie, but not just every 6 months, like every week, and it would be packed. It was like kind of a Sweetbacks, kind of, you know, Melvin Van Peebles type of thing. And so anyways, the Bob Marley's first performance in America, not just in Boston, but in America, was at Paul's Mall in 1973 with the Wailers. And so I was actually trying to locate exactly.
I saw that one. Yeah.
They just, the week, I think the week after that, or somewhere within that same month, he went to New York and opened for Bruce Springsteen, who was just kind of also
Just starting out.
starting out. They were saying, oh, there's this new Bob Dylan guy.
Yeah, not quite, but
Yeah,
I was
but
gonna,
there are all kinds of stories like that in the book.
But you were kind enough to bring in these images
what do we got?
for us, and you're going to show us some of the images, right?
Sure.
Be my guest.
I mean, what? So if I click this, it'll go up?
You go down there, and I think.
How do we do it? I don't remember.
Okay. So let's see what we got.
Double click on that, see what happens.
Hopefully something happens. Yep. Yep.
If not, we could talk about it.
Well, yeah, we could certainly talk
So
about
let's see what we got up there. We have the Hilltop Steakhouse. Do you have any memories of the Hilltop?
Oh, yeah, all kinds of meat. All meat.
It was an insane place. And the Cactus is still up. I don't know if you've driven by Route
Calf,
1.
it's still there?
It's still
collector's
there.
item.
It's been modified, and now there's, I think, like kind of new restaurants and condos, and it's not the same. And it's kind of sad, like the Hilltop went downhill and kind of stayed in a like almost dead for a long time, which was kind of sad. It kind of limped into the grave, whereas a lot of places kind of just stop, you know, like they kind of figure it. Because the thing about the Hilltop was it was enormous. It had, how many rooms? There was like the Kansas City room
Right.
and the Sioux City room, and it had all the, I mean, it was extreme. And actually, another place that is still around is the Kowloon, which is almost across the street.
Didn't they have a comedy club there at the
They still do. They
Yeah,
still do.
But I mean, the comedy revolution of the 80s, that was not at the Kowloon. Was it somewhere else?
Well, there's like the Prince place, like Lenny Clark still plays.
Yeah, that's what I
there
meant,
up
yeah.
on Route 1. So yeah, certainly there's a lot of that. But yeah, so it kind of shows you that it wasn't the Hilltop dying because there was also a Hilltop in Braintree, which I think shuttered first, and then the one on Route 1. But they also had a meat market, like in the back of the Hilltop, so you could buy like spare rib, buy 10 pounds of spare ribs on your way out of the
After having
venue.
a steak.
And they had the cows out front.
Right.
Do you remember one of my favorite stories was, it must have been in the 90s, someone cut the head off of either, I don't know if it was all of the cows, but most of them, and it was like an animal rights group, like beheaded all the cows, and then a couple days later, the heads would appear at different radio stations and maybe TV stations, and would kind of have their manifesto on there. And it was a temple to, it was a church of meat, that's for sure.
Now, what was the next?
So the next one up there, which we may or may not be able to see, is a dual one on the page, which I kind of like. On the top is the Sugar Shack.
What was the Sugar Shack?
The Sugar Shack was down off of the Common, where there are new Emerson dorms now, I believe. I think it was in the alley there. Or right near there. It was like where the transportation building used to be. And so that's, I believe, from 74, Parliament Funkadelic is playing. And then below that is an ad for a punk compilation called This Is Boston, Not LA. So that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition that I kind of like, to have that on there. I think over a couple more is Isaac Hayes performing at the Boston Garden.
Isaac Hayes, yeah.
In early 70s.
That's very, had shaved head and, yeah.
That poster, which apparently we can't see, is a really powerful poster too.
That's too bad.
After that is Skippy Whites. Skippy, very famous record store man, still around. I love Skippy dearly.
Does he still have a store?
He has one store in Eggleston on Columbus, and stop in and see him, and he'll tell you a story. And if you have a question about any artist,
like El Cheapo in Central Square.
Cheapo is still actually Cheapo is in what used to be the old Skippy when Skippy Whites was in Central. Cheapo was at the corner. Then Skippy closed that store, and then Cheapo moved in because it was bigger, I think. And the old Cheapo was downstairs, and this is like ground level. But yeah, I mean, so part of the book is about places that are long gone and kind of pining for that, things like the Hilltop. And hopefully some of what the book is about is Skippy Whites, is kind of celebrating the people who are still here. I mean, it's the retail market is crazy in any town, but in Boston, which is always changing, and I think Boston's extra tricky because of the college population, because all of a sudden they're all gone, like between semesters or in the summer, and then all of a sudden that's a lot of people to all of a sudden leave town if you're kind of, if you're a retail outlet that caters to young people and college students, or a club or something like that. So the Middle East, has been around forever and is still going. And
so poetry readings there.
Sure. I mean, the Middle East, the brothers are there.
They own the Arts Armory here.
They do, and you need venues that are independent, that aren't kind of controlled by more corporate influences, because that's where innovation happens, when you take chances, when, like the Channel, for example. Like the Channel wasn't going to book an unknown act just because it was a huge place, but they would put them on as an opening slot. So some of the bands that became big, a lot of people probably first saw them opening for whatever band might have come through town. So, but the Middle East was smaller, so you can start, or the Rat was not a large place, so you could start and take more risks, and that's where innovation happens, whether that's in poetry or in music or wherever. Do
you see? I mean, this covered basically the 60s to the 90s, right?
Through the very late 80s, yeah.
Through the very late 80s. I mean, is it a much different culture now with posters and pamphlets and things like that?
Well, I mean, my assessment would be there's always going to be young people in this town who...
But it's more social media now, or?
It is, but I still see posters, around. I mean, there's still people passing stuff out. If you go to the local record store, wherever, there's going to be posters. But yeah, a lot of it has shifted. There's obviously Facebook events now, and so I think it adds a dimension to it. But I think in the end, I think the thing that I think you would agree with, because as a publisher yourself, that you can have ebooks and you can have stuff online, but at the end of the day, people like holding something, so you could see...
Like to hold my wife also.
You could see all these ads on a website or something like that, but it's not the same. And it's kind of the same concept as this video event I have coming up that I also started kind of at the Brattle back in November, is with a lot of these video clips I'm showing, you can see them on YouTube, on your phone, and look at them and squint and try and see them, or you can see it on the...
Tell me about you say you have a project at the Brattle?
I had one in November, and hopefully...
Do you have any project coming up?
Yes. So April 11th at the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, I'm doing, which is a Thursday night, 7 o'clock, I'm doing the debut of the Buy Me Boston Video Loft. And so it's basically just a collection of funny, some serious videos that are all Boston, kind of from the same era as the book. So that there's not like necessarily a direct 100% correlation every time, but they are related. So for instance, I have a poster for a Rock Against Racism show in the book, for a Run DMC show at the channel in 84, 85. At this event on April 11th, I'm going to have another Rock Against Racism video that was produced and actually ran right here on Somerville Local Access in 1983, called "But Can You Dance to It?" That was produced...
Yeah, I saw someone on you saying the Kid. What was...
I don't actually know the Nintendo Kid. We'll have to see. That was obviously a thing here.
Yeah.
I was, so I didn't live in Somerville, but my wife and her friends all lived on Cameron Avenue outside of Davis Square. Apparently there was someone named the Nintendo Kid. I'm sure some viewers will know what that's about. But I told him if he was here, I'd get an autograph, but I don't think he's here.
I don't think he's here.
But yeah, so that's something I love. That's why it's amazing to be here too, with the station that you guys have been here for so long too. That's not a small thing. It's
no. And hopefully with the new federal finagling, we're not going to be endangered.
It's it's tricky. There was like Touch FM was a radio station over in Roxbury that was a low wattage thing that got shut down by the government. It's not easy.
Yeah, not easy. So anyway, thank you for joining us on
Real
Poet.
True